Hi, this is Gregory Brown with RMUnicorn, the Ruby Mendicant University video log. Over the last few days, I've been talking about the 5 factors of improving education that I came up with on Sunday. And today, I was talking about the importance of self-sustainability for educational programs. Now, the thing that I am most concerned with is that programs that we have, like primary education, are typically, at least for public schools, uh, subsidized by taxes and things like that, or completely paid for them, actually. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but the problem is that the schools themselves don't necessarily have control over their funding or a means to increase that funding as needed. And what that means is that someone else is in control of allotting that funding. But also, schools don't have the direct accountability for keeping themselves sustainable, which means that their programs are not reliant on their raw value, and there's no sort of market for evaluating these things. So that means that the standards for them are not set by the value of the program, but instead by a complex bureaucratic process that makes it so that any feedback that comes from people happens at at the end of a very long chain of politics. Now, on the other hand, a lot of private schools, the very successful private institutions, have such a large endowment that they themselves are no longer accountable, because as long as they continue to produce things that are symbols of wealth or power, that they still maintain their reputation and draw, so they too are not necessarily accountable directly for their actions. Now, I personally think that the private model is somewhat better, because at least at some point the school itself is responsible for maintaining its reputation and that sort of thing. But really, I would like to see educational programs move away from this entirely and get their funding through the basically through the direct value that they produce in society. And uh, I am having a very hard time coming up with exactly what that means, but what I envision is, for example, something like RMU. In the first year and a half of this program's existence, if all goes well, we will have produced something like 150 to 200 new free software projects. We'll be producing a comprehensive educational suite for managing, doing classroom administration, and for just basically everything that you would need to do to run this sort of educational program online. We'll be releasing all of that, and we'll be releasing a large amount of course materials, as well as sort of course outlines for those who would like to teach themselves. Uh, all of these things have a tremendous value to the community, and over time I believe that it's going to be hard to find something in the Ruby community that our students or our staff have not in some way had their hands in. And I think that at that point it makes a whole lot of sense for the community to support us in a direct way. However, pretty much if we're going to go the nonprofit route with this, it, it isn't smart to rely entirely on donations. There's a couple of reasons why. The first is, of course, that fundraising itself can be a full-time job, and any time that you spend fundraising is time that you're not spending on the core operation, which is a major problem. But a certain amount of donations will be necessary in the beginning, and right now we're accepting donations within RMU, and I probably will do a public call for donations as well. But I want to try and come up with some other relatively innovative ways of getting us funding. So some of the thoughts that I've had are doing things like perhaps benefit dinners, where we have a few well-known guests, probably associated with a conference or something like that. Um, Maybe doing benefit trainings, in which if people donate, then they can come and basically have a training for much less cost than what it would typically be to go to a commercial training that I taught. And maybe some other community-related things. I was also thinking of doing an associate program similar to what the Free Software Foundation does. And this would allow people to get things like newsletters and maybe some access to some extra resources, or to maybe if we end up running events, live events and things like that, that we can give people access to those as well. I really want to avoid traditional sponsorship, because I feel like as soon as you start taking large donations from sponsors, then you are in a sense responsible to them to some extent. Even if it's nothing explicit, you have this implicit tie to some other organization. If we rely on that sort of thing, I think it could be really bad. I think you see this a lot with conferences, in the sense that conferences that are very low cost would basically sometimes not be able to exist if it weren't for their sponsors, and that sort of puts them in a position where they can't really maintain control of their organization. Now, from what I know of the companies in the Ruby community that are sort of active in sponsorship, is that a lot of them are actually really reasonable and really fair with things. But nonetheless, just because of what could happen in that sort of environment, I want to avoid commercial ties where possible. So another thing I guess that we can do is we can start working on writing and things like that. But I mean, the real goal would be to, if we write any books or if we produce any open documentation, that we could actually release it under free documentation licenses, and that sort of defeats the purpose of asking people to pay for it. So I guess the problem is that if you're producing a ton of value and you're giving it away for free, how do you make sure that you have enough funding to make the organization sustain? Now, I don't have a good answer for that. I know that I've been working on average 25 to 30 hours a week on this, and will plan to continue to do that, and that for the schedule that we're trying to set up for next year, it would require me to work full-time, with RMU being my only major commitment. The combination of RMU and the free education movement stuff that we want to start developing. In addition to that, I expect that my wife will be putting in 5 to 10 hours of administrative work a week, in addition to her existing job, and that Jordan will be with us for 10 to 15 hours a week as well. So now we're talking about maybe 1 to 1.5 full-time jobs, and with that sort of thing extracted out over a year, it's something where, just ballparking, we're looking at $50,000 or $100,000 worth of funding that we're going to need to come up with in one way or another. And right now, I don't have a lot of great answers for that. I think that we will certainly, in the short term, be talking to accountants and lawyers and things like that to figure out how we can get a nonprofit set up, and also talk to them about whether that's the right route to go anyway. And that soon after that, we'll probably accept a small amount of funding for the first few months of 2011, so that we can make sure that we can keep running. And then we sort of need to look at the big picture and brainstorm about things and figure out how we're going to make this work. It's very likely that we'll do an open meeting in which people can catch up with us on IRC and make some suggestions on how we might be able to find this sort of funding. But I believe this is really, really important, and I believe it can be done through grassroots efforts, without many commercial ties, without having to rely on, say, government grants or anything like that. But I got to be honest and say that I don't have a clear path for that at all. So soon enough, we'll be starting to put my faith in this into test, and we'll try and figure out a way to make sure that we can keep things running. We're trying to be responsible about this, in the sense that raising $100,000 and refusing to accept investments or sponsorship is not going to be any easy job. And that number, who knows if it's right, maybe less, maybe more. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to develop a program that, if we get no funding at all, it would still be possible for us to carry this on as a side project. And if we get a little bit of funding, then we'll start to layer more things in. And then if we have enough funding, we'll do the plan that we want to do. But I don't know. I think this is probably something that I should hook up with other people who are doing similar efforts and find out how they're doing it. And this is somewhere where if there are people out there in the community who have suggestions or ideas, we could really, really use your help. So, unfortunately, this area is, of the 5 factors for improving education that I've talked about, the one that I have the least confidence that I know how to solve. There's several others that I know that we can do a good job with, but this one is a tough one. And I also don't want to give people false hope by making a program that is really, really good and really, really amazing for a few months and then burns out. We're going to need to find a plan to be able to sustain, even if we can't get the velocity that we would have had originally hoped for. So we're committed to doing that, and we're committed to solving this hard problem, but we can certainly use some help. So tomorrow we'll reach the last factor, and I think after I've done that, then I'll take these sort of disjoint rambling videos and collect them into an article or two, and then start to build our sort of core philosophy around that. So the last factor that we need to talk about is the importance of omnipresent education, or education that is immersive, and how that sort of affects people's learning experience. But this has been enough for today, and I thank you for watching, so I'll catch you tomorrow.